All right, so this is Tony Medina. I'm here with Dr. Stern from Boston University. We're here in San Diego at Mary Sayal's CTE benefit. Can you tell me what got you to the West Coast? How did you find out?
It was a plane. It was a plane. You know, Mary reached out to me several months ago to see if I would be at all interested in coming out to be the keynote speaker. And what was I supposed to say? Are you kidding? Yeah, it's such an honor to be able to come out here. I'm first of all, I was a huge fan of Junior's.
Yeah.
And what his incredibly tragic death did for awareness about this really devastating disease was really huge.
Yeah.
And so to be able to come out and meet some of the family, and to be able to do something in return, there's no question I would be here.
Great. And now, can you tell just the normal lay viewer that doesn't have a medical background, can you, in a very easy way, explain CTE?
I sure can.
Thanks.
Yeah. So CTE stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is a brain disease. It's not a brain injury, it's a brain disease that is very similar to Alzheimer's disease, but it's a unique disease. It's its own thing. And what's interesting about it is that we think we know what causes it. And that is having a history of getting your head hit over and over and over again earlier in life. And what happens is when your head is hit repeatedly and your brain moves violently back and forth, and then it gets hit again and violently back and forth, and it doesn't mean that you have to have huge hits or huge injuries or even symptoms when you get hit. In other words, it can be in, let's say, football, the routine play of football, where if you think of linemen, every play of every game and every practice, they're hitting their heads against each other. Mm-hmm. And that brain moves around, and when that happens, it starts this process in the brain cells that seems to be this kind of cascade of events that eventually leads to the buildup of an abnormal form of a protein that we all have in every one of our brain cells. But when it's abnormal, it does bad things. Mm-hmm. And that protein is called tau. And as that protein starts to build up, it starts to get in the way of the brain cells functioning. And then slowly but surely, it starts to destroy the brain cells. And years or even decades after the person stops getting their head hit, enough of that tau protein starts to build up and hurts the functioning and the success of the brain cells that symptoms begin. And so you start getting hit over and over again earlier in life. That sets in motion this beginning of a disease, and then slowly but surely it starts to destroy the brain. Mm-hmm. And as the brain gets more and more hurt, you start having symptoms.
Right.
And eventually, it keeps on progressing and progressing, and it can lead to death.
Right. And now, with the people that are being affected by this, I mean, it's a large span of the population. Athletes, domestic violence victims,
military service members.
Military. So it's spanning a large spectrum of the population. What is a way for people to recognize or be aware that this may be CTE and not a mental breakdown or a psychotic event? What do you say to that?
Well, you know, there's a lot of what you just said, and most of it is we just don't know. So the first part is we don't know how common it is.
Right.
We don't know it's a big part of the population.
Right.
Right now, we really have no idea.
Right.
We think that there's probably more people than we've ever expected.
Yeah.
But we don't know how many, and we don't know who's at the greatest risk. What we think we know is that people who have the greatest amount of cumulative hits to the head seem to be at greatest risk. And so people like American football players, other contact and collision sport athletes where there's a lot of hits, perhaps military service members who have repeated blast injuries and other brain trauma. Like you said, domestic violence, where maybe someone's head is getting hurt over and over again.
Yeah.
But we just don't know. The most common thing that we've seen, that we've known about for decades and decades, almost 100 years, is athletes.
Yeah.
Started with boxers.
Right. Punch drunk.
Punch drunk,
Yeah.
dementia pugilistica, the dementia of pugilists and boxers. We've known about that since 1928. It's the same thing as CTE. So we just don't know. So that's the first part. We don't know how common it is. But if people are concerned that they might have it, the first thing I tell them is, whoa, don't be. Not everyone who starts having some difficulties in life and has depression or starts acting out of control or has memory difficulties or problems with judgment, that doesn't mean they have CTE.
Right.
And most of those things can be treated. And so just because someone has some difficulties and maybe they have some history of playing football doesn't mean that they've got this horrible disease.
Okay. And so as far as the testing right now that is being done, I've noticed personally that a lot of it is centered on solely retired football player, past football players, or you have to be a certain age, 45.
You've been reading my stuff, haven't you?
I'm trying to get into a study, but I don't qualify for any of these. And so my question is, what is it that, because to me it just seems that that demographic of football players and past college athletes is almost like shooting fish in a barrel. You're going to get the results you would expect to get based off of the data of the head trauma and the head injuries leading to CTE. Why haven't they opened the studies to a more broader, for like example myself, I'm 42. Within the last year and a half, I've started forgetting I even forgot how to get home. I went to the wrong house, thought I was home. Not driving anymore. A lot of neurological things, numbness on my body, but I can't qualify for a study, and no real, or they're all real, but no neurologist is really educated on it over here. I'm seeing a specialist at Stanford in the memory clinic, but they still don't have a clue as to what true CTE symptoms, treatment, care and support for the patient, it doesn't exist. So how do you expand that?
Again, absolutely fantastic questions. It's at the root of so much of it. I'm going to start with the first one, which is where are we with trying to diagnose it?
Yeah.
And that leads to why we focus on certain groups for our research. So we cannot diagnose CTE during life right now. It is a diagnosis based on looking at the brain tissue after someone dies. And so obviously a huge next step is the ability to diagnose it while someone's alive.
Right.
But people aren't really aware that all these other similar diseases like Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body disease and frontotemporal lobar degeneration and progressive supranuclear palsy, all these
Brain
difficult things to describe, they're progressive neurodegenerative diseases. We still can't diagnose those accurately during life.
Right.
They're diagnosed by looking at the brain after someone dies. Alzheimer's disease, we're the closest to diagnosing during life.
Yeah, because I think they tested me for a protein after a lumbar puncture or something.
Yeah.
Is that a
That's a
one
way to do it. That's
Okay,
exactly
yeah.
right. And it's because of so much growth that's happened with Alzheimer's disease that people like me who are trying to figure out how to diagnose CTE during life,
Yeah.
we can use what's been learned in Alzheimer's. So I'm actually an Alzheimer's researcher and doctor, and so originally, and
Yeah.
I still do that.
Yeah.
And so we're able to kind of take advantage of all the incredible growth that's taken place
Yeah.
in the last just 5 to 10 years. And so we're using similar types of tests and then tweaking them a little bit and trying to figure out what can we possibly do to understand how to diagnose CT during life.
Mhm.
Because if we can diagnose it during life, then we can do all kinds of things. We can
Right.
figure out how common it is, what the risk factors are. We can figure out why one person gets it and another person doesn't.
Right.
We can, most importantly, start clinical trials of new treatments that are specifically geared to treat
Regenerating.
CTE,
Okay.
and maybe even start them early enough so we can prevent the symptoms in the first place. So that's the goal. So to answer your question about why does research like the studies that I run
Yeah.
focus on very specific groups? Well, because we don't know how to diagnose it yet.
Right.
And so we need to start by testing out these new ways, these new types of medical tests
Uh,
in people who we think are the most likely to have it compared to people who shouldn't have it.
right.
And so, for example, football players. So we focus a lot of our research on former NFL players and former college players. And then controls, meaning people who are the same age
And never-
but never hit their head.
Right.
Because if we know that hitting your head is the necessary variable to get it, then we want to remove that.
Right.
So, it's the starting place. Man, would I love to be able to study all kinds of people and to provide people that sense of hope by allowing them to participate in
Yeah.
all kinds of studies.
Yeah.
So we're starting to extend it in our research. So we're looking right now at former hockey players and soccer players, and men and women, because we need to understand more.
Right.
But the big studies, like the one called the Diagnose CTE research project that I oversee, and that's all around the country, that one we do start at age 45, and it goes to age 74, and it's for former professional and former college players. Once we start getting answers, then we can extend and broaden and broaden and broaden, because there's so many things we have to understand.
Okay, I appreciate that, and that makes a lot of sense. To wrap it up, because I don't want to take a lot of your time, if you had one thing or a few things to say to parents of children that play tackle football, soccer, any kind of sport, what would you tell them? Because right now the fear is real, that head injuries do cause later on down the road, it can cause, CTE or some kind of neurodegenerative problem. What would you say to parents? Would you tell them, obviously, no contact sports, be very vigilant, go to the ER for head issue? What's your recommendation?
So it's kind of a twofold answer. One is, don't worry. Just because your kid has had a concussion or 2 or 3 doesn't mean they're going to get this disease later in life.
Right. Okay.
So don't worry.
Okay.
That's one side.
Uh-huh.
Okay? Having a few concussions is not the issue.
No.
In
yeah,
fact, concussions are not the big deal when it comes to developing CTE.
it's the subconcussive.
It's the subconcussive repetitive hits that you don't stop from. You don't take 2 or 3 weeks away from play. It's you just keep on hitting.
Yeah.
So one side is, don't worry. Your kid's not going to have a brain disease because they've had a concussion. Another important thing is, kids need to be active.
Yeah.
athletics and sports and team sports are really important.
Absolutely.
We need to keep kids active for
Yeah.
all kinds of important reasons.
Yeah.
But the flip side of this is we have to think about what us parents do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we do absolutely everything to keep our kids healthy and safe and make sure they reach their full potential. And then we do this weird thing. We put kids under the age of 12 in this big plastic helmet with a face mask that does a few different things. One is it makes them a bobblehead because their heads are fully grown but their bodies aren't, and their necks are weak, and so it kind of goes like that. It also makes it so they can't feel pain,
Yeah.
right? Kids, people, human beings are supposed to feel pain. You know, you touch the stove, you're supposed to not touch the stove again.
Right.
And then we say to the kids, go at it, go out on the football field, listen to your coach, and we want you to play as hard as you can. Even nowadays, there's all these measures to reduce concussions or manage concussions or be aware of them. That's not the issue. It's that routine play. So we tell the kids to do that. And what parents aren't aware of is during the ages of around 9 to 12 are these unbelievable changes in the brain that are going on. These huge milestones that are making the brain turn into an adult. And if we hit the head over and over again and hurt that brain over and over again during that very important time period, this kind of neurodevelopmental vulnerability time, then the research is starting to show that it can lead to later life problems. The research isn't definitive yet.
Mm-hmm.
Science never becomes definitive.
Right.
It's a slow process. But I have to ask those parents, and I was one of them. I have, you know, I'm guilty as charged. I watched my kids play these great sports, and I was on the sideline.
Yeah.
But now we're learning more.
Right.
And so we have to step back and say, why do we do that? Why do we have our kids hit their heads repeatedly, having that most important organ in their body, that brain, get jostled around and injured over and over again during this incredibly important period of neurodevelopmental milestones?
Right.
Does it make common sense?
Not at all. Yeah. And okay, one last question.
Oh, that was your last one.
That's the last one. If you had to put an age on CTE research like a human, where are we?
Yes, that's a great question. I used to say all the time that we were in the infancy of our knowledge, of our understanding of CTE. And then I realized I stepped back, and 10 years after we started doing this stuff, oh my goodness, the amount of research has just been growing and growing. And not just from our group at BU.
Yeah.
It's just been growing like this. And so now I really feel like we're in the toddlerhood.
Okay.
We still have so much to learn.
Yeah.
And the starting point is being able to figure out how to diagnose it during life. And so we need people to participate in the research. People can go to our website for the Diagnose study. It's diagnosecte.org.
Okay.
Find out about the different types of research that they can participate in. But most importantly, realize that this is a big deal.
Yeah.
But we just don't know enough at this point.
All right. So all you patients, hang in there. There's hope. Dr. Stern, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
All right.